Alright guys, so Ace Pokemon. Like for every series and almost every trainer, they're practically the main event, and by random chance you don't know, well, it's in the name. They're the ace in the hole, the gold medalist on the team, but what about the silver medalist? Well, that's why we're here today, and a certain term I coined for these guys are pseudo aces, derived from pseudo legendary Pokemon. You know, these guys kinda already have labels such as powerhouses or sweepers, but pseudo ace sounds much cooler, I'm not gonna lie. But anyways, we're gonna dive into all the main series and pinpoint exactly who would be labeled as such. And something to clarify in terms of aces, Pikachu is technically the end-all be-all, but the aces we'll be referring to are the regional ones that appear every main series. So for the likes of Charizard or Infernape, we'll discuss who's the second ace in command behind them. And to make things interesting, multiple Pokemon of the same team are allowed to be pseudo aces, just like how there can be multiple powerhouses. And one last thing is that being the strongest Pokemon behind an ace isn't the main factor. For example, let's say Torkoal has the best feat out of the Hoenn team. How often can he pull that off? Not only do you have to be strong, you also need to be reliably consistent. No point in crowning one-hit wonders, you know? But I think that's enough warm-up, so without stalling any longer, let's get started.
Pokemon, get to the
Starting right off the bat, we have the original series team, and it's pretty obvious that Snorlax deserved this title. Right off the bat, since his capture, Snorlax has been a part of nearly all of Ash's toughest battles in original series, and it's not simply because he has good feats, he's ridiculously consistent. Like 1 pick against Claire, 2 picks against Gary, 2 picks against Harrison, and even during the Battle Frontier after the original series, he wins the battle against Greta in a 1-2 lead. But enough excitement, you're probably now thinking, case closed, right? Well, I actually think there are 2 more candidates worthy of being called a pseudo ace for vastly underappreciated and overlooked reasons. Those 2 other candidates being Bulbasaur and Squirtle. Now, back during the Orange Islands and the Indigo League, they weren't really giving pseudo ace energy, but by Johto and even later in the anime entirely, their potential finally awakened and become much more powerful. During the round robin in the Johto League, these 2 were the ones that secured Ash the victory, the most important battles outside of Gary and Harrison, mind you. What I liked about that is that they pulled a Charizard in a way by usually being rarely accessed and then coming back in clutch if Ash needs to win a tough battle. Fast forward to the Battle Frontier though, and when Ash goes up against Brandon, his biggest obstacle at the time, for round 3 he selects Bulbasaur and Squirtle too. Pikachu and Charizard are no surprise since that battle was Ash intending to go all out, and those 2 are commonly recognized as one of his strongest. But the other 2 Kanto starters tagging along is massively underlooked. Not only does this imply that Bulbasaur and Squirtle are on a similar pedestal to Charizard, they practically outperform him, showing that they can hang with the big dogs too. So to make up for that gigantic original series roster, we start off with 3 pseudo aces right off the bat, being Bulbasaur, Squirtle, and Snorlax. And now for the advanced generation. The pseudo ace for this series is for reasons as clear as Snorlax, that Pokemon being Swallow. Right off the jump, this bird is someone to be respected. As a Tailo, but once this bird enters its final stage, Ash's overall team power spiked like crazy. From winning Ash 2 gyms in a row to having a baller performance in the Hoenn League, Swallow was the undisputed GOAT of the Hoenn team. In fact, Swallow was practically more of an ace than Grovyle during that section of the advanced generation, if we're being honest. And to top it all off, Swallow was also pretty good in the Battle Frontier, winning Ash 1 battle and doing pretty well in another, which is much more consistent than some other strong Ashmons. And for a little part 2, we have Corphish as the other pseudo ace, and this was a decision made played last second. At first glance, the roughneck of the sea has seen some bad days, worse than Swellow probably, but when you realize he was actually just as baller as Swellow, for every time he jobbed, I see that he would always make it up with such a better win. Jobbed against Tyson? Might as well tag team with Swellow and defeat Elite 4 level Pokemon. He also does well in the rematch against Annabelle, who may or may not be the strongest frontier brain outside of Brandon. But to wrap up the AG section, the last candidate was Glalie, but my reasoning against him being a pseudo ace was that his performance is a little too non-existent and even outdated. He was put in the box after the Hoenn saga, and by the time AG was over, his Hoenn peers surpassed him astronomically. So the pseudo aces of the advanced generation is the Swellow, Corphish. Now moving on to DP, this may be a little strange, I'm not too sure, but the pseudo ace for this series is Gible. Now even though this little guy only really fought in the Sinnoh League, that's already good enough in comparison to the rest of Ash's Sinnoh Pokemon. Not only was he one of two of the Sinnoh team that Ash bothered to use in the Sinnoh League other than a Paul battle, getting a 2-for-1 against Conway and performing better than most of Ash's team against Tobias, he showed not only is he powerful but also consistent. Just like he's a soon-to-be pseudo legendary, he's definitely a pseudo ace in my eyes, and looking at the other candidates, it was rough reviewing them. From the Byron Gym and onwards, Weasel fell off in quality harder than the anime did during the XY era, and Staraptor is decent, but nothing crazy. Glasgow lacks enough battles to show off for his new and improved self, and Torterra as well. Torterra. Once again, look at Gible, and if you ever want to think about the Sinnoh's team pseudo ace, that's your guy. Now heading on to Unova, it's sorta simple and simply put, it's Pignite. And considering how most of Ash's Unova team is a mixed bag, it was really easy to notice how Pignite stands apart from the rest. He not only participates in the most gyms in comparison to the other candidates, he also has the best win record out of them too if memory serves correct. And that's pretty remarkable when Pokemon that start off good and eventually falling off is an event that happened a couple of times before. Also to note is some narrative weight to Pignite, having that Charmander Chimchar background running through in his veins. So, a point there. Although there is some debate if Pignite is the true ace of the Unova team, let alone a pseudo ace, but it's heavily implied and even semi-stated by the anime that Crocodile is the actual ace of the Unova saga. Not a lot of content surrounding this section, but nonetheless, Pignite is still fantastic being pseudo ace. But moving on with the next series, we have XY, and this time it'll be a 2-in-1, being both Talonflame and Hawlucha. Like, I know there's a few people that gas up the dragon types for many reasons, but Talonflame and Hawlucha may be in a league of their own throughout the run of the Kalos era. Their win record may not be in the upper echelon, but that's because they don't often finish battles and therefore would end up losing right after taking a win of some sort. It's nothing notable to gas up in comparison to Pignite or even monsters like Swallow or Snorlax, but these guys are the most reliable you can find, since they are the core members outside of Pikachu and Greninja. And to finally explain the dragon types I've been sorta vague about, Northern was, but not really, but sorta also really a late addition and was a little undercooked in the power department. Then there's Goodra, who may very well could have been the primary contender halfway in XY before he was released, if only they didn't fall off harder than, you know, the anime did after the XY. To elaborate further, the Kalos League is the best example where both Goodra and Northern suffer from a tie and a jobbed KO. The same results in the same battles, mind you. And while nearly all of the Kalos team outside of Greninja and Pikachu didn't show off crazily, like said earlier, Hawlucha and Talonflame have the leverage of having the most screen time and being the most reliable when the aces weren't active. And getting down to Alola, we're finally almost out of the ballpark, and the pseudo ace for this team was hard yet easy to pinpoint. So to list both candidates here, we have Incineroar and Rowlet. First though, let's briefly mention the poor souls that didn't make it, being Melmetal, Naganadel, and Nebby. In short, Melmetal is a noob, Naganadel was used once, and Nebby wasn't really on the team. So basically, the situation is just like with XY, and starting with Incineroar, this was a little hard to tackle. Like, when it comes to situations to just a regular ace outside of Pikachu, there's a lot of turmoil in my mind, since I would argue Incineroar could be the ace instead of Lycanroc. Plus, it's been shown many times in Alola that Lycanroc and Torracat were something of a rivalry, putting them on equal pedestals actually, but for narrative purposes and for the sake of the video, we can only pick one regular ace, and Lycanroc has that narrative advantage. However, this also explains how Incineroar is the pseudo ace here. Like, wouldn't it make perfect sense that the rival of the ace itself were to be next up on the throne? But to wrap things up, let's talk Rowlet, who may be very underestimated since it's in its first stage. However, this little guy was putting in good work across the series. It'd be a hassle to go over every win like I did before, but just know he wins nearly as much as Lycanroc and Incineroar. Because, fun fact, Lycanroc, Incineroar, and Rowlet all share a very similar win rate, so really supporting his agenda right about now. Now finally, we are at the end of the line with Pokemon Journeys, and the pseudo ace for this team is... I don't know. This was and still kinda is the hardest to pinpoint, since outside of Pikachu and Lucario, the rest of the Journey team was really a much of a mixed bag with how balanced they were. The first candidate that came to mind was Surfetched, and did you see what he did during the Masters 8 arc? Not only did he force Cynthia's Garchomp to get on her knees, being the first Pokemon to inflict severe damage on her, he also did the same to Leon's Rillaboom. The same Rillaboom that humiliated champion level Pokemon several times within that same arc. Not to mention, he's something of a rival slash best friend of Lucario, although he seemed a bit lacking in comparison to another candidate. So speaking of best friends, the other candidate was Dracovish. In comparison to the duck we just talked about, this little abomination of the fossil that was best friends with Surfetched achieved a lot more. Not only was it more consistent, always getting a KO before fainting except for one time if memory serves correct, he may arguably have better feats. In the battle where the two fought against Drasna, it was Dracovish that secured the overall win, and while Surfetched dealt great damage to Rillaboom, it was Dracovish who took him down in humiliating fashion. And I might also add that this thing forced Steven Stone to switch out his strongest Pokemon right off the bat. It's like, round up everything Surfetched did, upgrade it a little, and boom, you have Dracovish. But at the end of the day, it doesn't scream pseudo ace to me. I don't know why. So here, this will be my last and most confident candidate on who would be the pseudo ace for the Journeys team, and that is Gengar. Sorry to Dragonite, I personally think her endgame performances are a little lacking out of the four candidates here the most, and to be honest, the reasoning for Gengar is very simple. One, he has the strongest narrative and development out of the team, and two, he's the only one with a gimmick outside of Pikachu and Lucario. It's not treated as such, but I like to envision these three as some sort of monster trio, considering they're the ones with the three primary mechanics at the time on Ash's team. But personally, I'd like to hear what you all would like to say. It's a gamble whether or not these get a bit of traction, let alone comments in general, but I'm really interested to see who would be considered the pseudo ace. Maybe it's Dragonite, who I left out, or even Surfetched or Dracovish. Heck, maybe all four. But personally, I'm gonna go with Gengar as the pseudo ace of the Journeys team for now. But that now wraps everything up. For a little recap of the pseudo aces I have linked up, we have Snorlax, Bulbasaur, and Squirtle for the original series team, Swellow for the advanced generation team, Gibbo for the Sinnoh team, Pignite for the Unova team, Talonflame and Hawlucha for the Kalos team, Incineroar and Rowlet for the Alola team, and preferably Gengar for the Journeys team. But again, always feel free and input who you would think would be the pseudo ace here. And don't be afraid to have multiple of them on the same team. And all in all, this lineup looks pretty solid. Don't really have much to say, and because of that, I ought to end this short. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got for now. Yep.